That any parent can agree with me when I say that teenagers can be extremely difficult to deal with. And most teenagers try their best to be good kids, but they are often a lot more rebellious than they were when they were younger. Teenagers going out of their way to rebel against their parents or even the law is often depicted in the media. You watch the movie Grease or Footloose, and you see that most teenagers shown in the movie are awfully rebellious. Going out drinking, trying to have sex with other teenagers, doing other things that are illegal. These are all things that can be related back to our teenage years. I myself am also a teenager and can tell you that being rebellious, whether that's partying, sex, or other rebellious acts, seem to be the only thing on the minds of teenagers. So why is it that teenagers are so rebellious? Most have no reason to be. Oftentimes these teenagers have been given a nice cushy life, and yet they seem to rebel anyway. Even if it isn't in an extreme fashion, it still happens. Well, here's one idea. There's been a number of times where I myself have gotten into an argument with my dad because of an opposite opinion. We would argue for a while until it would stop for a second, and I'd realize that I didn't know why I was arguing with him. Because it was a stupid thing to be arguing over, but for some reason I felt compelled to argue back, and I didn't know why. I then would realize that I was being rebellious and I simply had no idea before I actually took the time to think about it. A time of discovery is what teenagers are going through, a time of discovering themselves. This is a time when they will choose what kind of person they want to be, what job they want, what their personality should be like, how they will run their life. In our modern age, this can be especially difficult for them to do. There are so many different sorts of role models they can take after: celebrities, teachers, students, their parents. So in short, they have to decide what traits they want to take from those around them. For instance, it's quite common for teenagers to have the same haircut as their favorite celebrity. This is because they want to be more like their celebrity, so one way for them to do so is to style their hair in a similar fashion. Another way they may copy others is the way that they talk. Teenagers will often take over other people's catchphrases, which can start trends. I know that for a little while, people in my school would call things dank, which, well, most people know means somewhere damp and musty. However, people were using the word dank to call something cool. And this was likely because some famous person did it once and it caught on with the teenagers, because they are trying new things to try and figure out who they are. I didn't bother calling cool things dank unless I was kidding, because to me it seemed a dumb word to use to describe something you find awesome. I mean, why would you call something awesome damp and musty? To me it made no sense, but to others, using their own words, it would have seemed like a pretty dank way of talking. So it's clear that teenagers are searching for their own personal identities. But during this time, they are also trying to become more independent. Being a teenager, I've had times where I haven't agreed with decisions my parents would make for me, such as how late one can stay up. I used to always want to stay up later and later, and I felt that by my parents giving me a 9:30 curfew, they were holding me down. So in an attempt to become more independent, I asked for a later bedtime, similar to what my parents had. This happens for all teenagers. They realize, well, whether consciously or unconsciously, that they are soon going to be adults and that they will fend for themselves. So they slowly start to try to become more independent, and oftentimes rule breaking comes along with that. So they may start staying up later than their bedtime. I know that I'm guilty there. Or keep more secrets to themselves, or try to work out their own problems, or do other things to try and become more independent. Another thing that comes along with teenage rebellion is the thought process of their parents don't understand them. Because they're more independent from their parents and are creating a new lasting personality for themselves, they believe that their parents are different from them and don't understand because they haven't gone through the same situations that they have. This can be true on occasion, but more often than not, our parents have experienced the exact same situations we have. And even if they haven't, parents are here to love us when others do not and help us through our tough times. Sometimes by just being a listening ear. So what should parents do when their child is going through this stage of developmental individuating? Well, not to brag or anything, but I don't usually like to rebel against my parents because I simply don't want to. This is for a number of reasons. One is that I love my parents. Teenagers that love their parents are less likely to rebel against them because they don't want to disappoint them. And one way to make your teenager love you is to love them and bond and create a close relationship with them. This way, when your teenager begins to want to rebel more, it won't be so extreme because they would want you to be proud of them. Another reason I don't often rebel against my parents is that I know I would be punished for it. And this is something that most parents don't seem to do anymore. They may yell at their child, but things such as grounding them have slowly started to disappear. This is not a good thing because it gives the child the idea that they can go right ahead and do anything that they'd very well like to. When in the real world, that's not true. We have rules we have to obey too, and they're called laws. So punishment for improper behavior is important. Lastly, I don't rebel against my parents because I try to go off of their example most of the time. If a child's parents rebelled against their parents and rebelled during their adult life, that child would be more likely to rebel as well. So if you want your teenager to be less rebellious and act in a more proper fashion, you have to set a good example yourself. In conclusion, as teenagers, you go through a period of developmental individuating. This is normal, and this is the cause of rebellion in teenagers. Oftentimes, they don't realize they're rebelling, and as a parent, you simply need to set a good example for them to follow and build a connection with them so they don't feel alone during this difficult process. I think a great lesson for parents when it comes to dealing with teenagers is a quote from Footloose, near the end of the movie when Reverend Shaw says in his sermon, "Do I hold on or do I trust you to yourselves? Let go and hope that you've understood at least some of my lessons. If we don't start trusting our children, how will they ever become trustworthy?" Thank you for listening to my presentation.